I'm eating breakfast, but I'm trying to time budget, squeezing only a few minutes here and there for these videos. I am ahead, or I was, but I don't want to fall behind. Anyway, so that last video brought up a memory that I've forgotten about. When I lived in the war zone, New Mexico is such a nightmare, especially Albuquerque. Of just shitty people and poverty, etc. Which those things are connected. Um, when I moved into this house in the war zone, for those who don't know, the war zone is also called the international zone. It's Albuquerque's worst neighborhood, but Albuquerque's got a lot of bad neighborhoods, so it's just, it's competing. It's like a competition. Who can be the worst neighborhood with most violence and drugs and crime, etc. Um, I was living there, and there was this neighbor who was smoking marijuana, and it went into the house through the windows, doors, etc. You got to have ventilation. You got to breathe air, and put me in a schizophrenic episode against my will and without my consent. Landlord then showed up and tried to undo. I had piled all this garbage against the gate access to the side and back of the house because the crackheads were going through there to steal things and break into the house. I caught more than one guy literally picking the back door lock, which they've clearly done repeatedly because they unscrewed the light bulb and stuff like that before doing it. And there were signs of forced entry. It used to be a squat house before I moved in. The reason the landlord moved me in was to keep the squatters out. So this landlord showed up, and because I was in the schizophrenic episode set off by the marijuana smoke from the neighbor, I put him in the hospital with 7 stitches to his head with a baseball bat. It was very interesting because I was watching Suguri or something, Death Frenzy. It's a Japanese animation. Really good anime. They have a scene with these samurais fighting where the guy uses a sword to slice a cut above the eye, and the blood drains into the eye, causing blindness. It's a very tactical move. And I literally took the bat, broke it on like a brick or something, so it was a sharp edge of splinters and whatnot instead of the round, blunt edge. And I lifted it up to block and then bought it down in like a half figure eight movement and sliced right over his eye. I didn't fortunately end up, they didn't call the police on me or anything, but just like Vashon, I was the only one who tried to prevent that by avoiding secondhand marijuana smoke, involuntary exposure, and telling anyone who would listen to me, government, police, family, you name it, anyone who listens, even people who don't listen, I try to force it on them sometimes. Marijuana sets off my schizophrenia. That's the kind of shit that happens. This is the kind of shit that happens. And the responses are always, no way, you're lying, shut up, bleh. Right? Because druggies are not the people with the highest moral caliber, let alone known for honesty, etc. But the other interesting thing is the fact that I did learn violence from the media because there are the white supremacists, for example, will say that Jews are the ones behind this socially engineered moral decline. I don't think the Jews are behind anime. I think the Japanese are behind anime because it's Japanese animation from Japan. Now, I know with globalism and multiculturalism, anime has been, perverted and subverted to be westernized, etc. And in some ways, there are some improvements with that process, but also a lot of just multiculturalism, just the melting pot. It dilutes and degrades the quality of authentic Japanese animation made in Japan by Japanese artists through a culture that goes back centuries. Culturally transmitted traits are visible in anime, such as the Japanese culturally transmitted trait of work ethic and perfection in your work and self discipline. Oh yeah, and that's another funny thing. A common thing I'll see on alt right websites is white supremacists will say the Jew fears the samurai. Now, instead of trusting white supremacists about what the Jews fear, I decided to go to the source, the Jews. And so I watched these. It's like an IDF series on YouTube. It's actually really good. It's not in English. I guess you could create subtitles maybe, but I didn't bother trying to learn Hebrew, or I was. I guess violin's gonna replace that. But the guy has a picture on his wall in his IDF quarters of the samurai, and I think he had the samurai, code. So clearly, the Jew doesn't fear the samurai. Like this, so back to the original point, because this isn't about regulation of truth on the internet. Um, it wasn't my fault that I put my landlord in the hospital. It was the fault of the person smoking marijuana. So if someone were to call the cops and say, "Yeah, this guy just beat me in the head with a baseball bat," to really be an uncorrupt implementation of justice, they wouldn't arrest me. They'd arrest the guy smoking the marijuana that caused me to go into that schizophrenic episode, because it was not voluntary intoxication. It was forced drugging that caused psychosis, that caused the 7 stitches in that guy's face. Yeah. So again, where does accountability fall? If America was truly moral, cannabis industry leaders, lobbyists, etc., would be publicly executed for all the vehicular fatalities, suicides, homicides, homelessness, welfare, like all the lives they're destroying for greed. And they're not even the only ones. So, uh, I'm doing everything I can to avoid negative outcomes, and the corruption of society is not reflecting that with positive reinforcement. Instead, like so many other people, I'm being punished for being good and trying to do the right thing. Way to go, America. Way to go.